The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Millie's Diner on Highway 40, just outside of Memphis. It was the kind of steady, persistent rain that seemed to wash the color out of everything, leaving the world looking like an old photograph. Inside the diner, the warmth and the smell of fresh coffee and bacon created a sanctuary against the gray morning. Kenny Rogers sat in the corner booth, his weathered hands wrapped around a white ceramic mug. At 71, he had learned to appreciate the simple pleasures: a good cup of coffee, the sound of rain on glass, the gentle hum of conversation from working folks starting their day. He'd driven through the night from Nashville, heading to a small town in Arkansas, where he was scheduled to perform at a benefit for the local children's hospital. The diner was busy with the morning rush. Truckers hunched over plates of eggs and hash browns, construction workers grabbed coffee to go, and a few travelers like himself sought refuge from the road. Kenny kept his baseball cap pulled low, hoping to avoid recognition. These days, he preferred anonymity to the spotlight. That's when he noticed her. Maria Santos moved between the tables with practiced efficiency, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates. She was probably in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes that seemed to hold more wisdom than weariness. Her uniform was crisp and clean despite the early hour, and she moved with the grace of someone who took pride in her work, no matter how humble others might consider it. Kenny watched as she approached a table of businessmen in expensive suits. They were loud and demanding, snapping their fingers for service and speaking to her as if she were invisible. One of them, a heavy-set man with a gold watch, made a crude joke about the help that caused his companions to laugh loudly. Maria's face remained composed, professional, but Kenny caught the slight tightening around her eyes. He'd seen that look before, the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to swallow small humiliations as part of their daily bread. "More coffee, sir?" Kenny looked up to find Maria standing beside his table, coffee pot in hand. Her voice was soft, with just a trace of an accent that suggested English wasn't her first language. "Please," Kenny said, offering her a warm smile. "And take your time. I'm not in any hurry." Something in his tone made her pause. In a world of impatient customers and rushed interactions, genuine kindness was rare enough to be noticed. "Thank you," she said, filling his cup with steady hands. "You're very kind." As she turned to continue her rounds, one of the businessmen at the corner table called out impatiently, "Hey, waitress, this coffee's cold. What kind of place is this?" Maria hurried over, apologizing softly. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me get you a fresh cup right away." "You should be sorry," the man snapped. "I'm paying good money for decent service, and this is what I get? Cold coffee and slow service?" Kenny felt his jaw tighten. He'd encountered his share of difficult people over the years. But there was something particularly ugly about watching someone abuse their small position of power over another human being. Maria returned quickly with a fresh pot of coffee, her movements careful and deliberate. But as she leaned over to pour, the businessman suddenly gestured wildly with his hand, apparently making some point to his companions. His elbow caught Maria's wrist. The coffee pot tilted, and hot coffee splashed across the table and directly onto Kenny Rogers' jacket. The moment of truth. The diner fell silent. Maria stood frozen, the coffee pot still in her trembling hands, her face pale with horror. Hot coffee dripped from Kenny's jacket onto the floor, the dark stain spreading across the expensive fabric. "Oh my God," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The businessman who had caused the accident leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "Looks like the help just destroyed that gentleman's jacket. Hope he's got insurance." His companions chuckled, but there was an uncomfortable edge to their laughter. Even they seemed to sense they had crossed a line. Kenny looked down at his jacket, a beautiful leather piece that had been a gift from his daughter. The coffee stain was spreading, probably permanent. Then he looked up at Maria, who was fighting back tears, her whole body shaking. The entire diner waited to see what would happen next. Kenny stood up slowly, removing his jacket with careful, deliberate movements. Every eye in the room was on him. Maria took a step back, probably expecting anger, maybe even a lawsuit. Instead, Kenny folded the jacket neatly and set it on the table. Then he looked directly at Maria, his voice carrying clearly through the silent diner. "Ma'am," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "That jacket doesn't matter one bit. What matters is that you're okay. Are you hurt?" Maria stared at him in disbelief. "Am I hurt?" "Sir, I just ruined your jacket. I should be asking if you're hurt." Kenny smiled. The kind of smile that had comforted millions of fans over the years. Clothes can be replaced, people can't. Now, are you burned? Did any of that coffee splash on you? No, sir, Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. But your jacket is just a jacket, Kenny interrupted gently. I've got plenty of jackets. What I don't have plenty of is chances to meet good people like you. He turned toward the table of businessmen who were watching the exchange with growing discomfort. Gentlemen, I believe you owe this lady an apology. That accident happened because one of you was careless with his gestures. The heavy-set man's face reddened. Now wait just a minute. No, you wait, Kenny said, his voice still calm but carrying an authority that made the entire diner take notice. This woman has been working hard all morning, trying to give you good service. The least you can do is treat her with the respect she deserves. An older trucker at the counter turned around on his stool. That's Kenny Rogers, he said quietly to his companion. The singer. The whisper spread through the diner like ripples on a pond. Kenny Rogers, the gambler, the legend. But Kenny's attention remained focused on Maria, who was looking at him with an expression of wonder and gratitude. Sir, she said softly, I can't let you just… What's your name? Kenny asked. Maria Santos. Well, Maria Santos, I want you to know something. In 30 minutes, I'm going to forget about this jacket, but I'm never going to forget the way you handled yourself just now. Grace under pressure, that's a rare quality. The story unfolds. Kenny sat back down and gestured for Maria to join him. She glanced nervously toward the kitchen, where her supervisor was watching through the service window. Don't worry about him, Kenny said, following her gaze. I'll make sure you don't get in trouble for this. Maria sat on the edge of the booth seat, still clutching her coffee pot like a lifeline. Mr. Rogers, I can't believe you're being so kind about this. That jacket looked expensive. Things are just things, Maria. Tell me about yourself. How long have you been working here? 3 years, she said, finally setting the coffee pot down. Since my husband passed away. I needed steady work, and Mr. Henderson, he owns the diner, he gave me a chance when nobody else would. Kenny nodded, understanding the unspoken story behind her words. What did you do before? Maria's face lit up slightly. I was a music teacher, elementary school. I taught for 22 years. A music teacher? Kenny leaned forward with interest. What happened to that job? Budget cuts, Maria said simply. The school district eliminated the music program. They said it wasn't essential. Her voice carried the quiet sadness of someone who had watched their life's work dismissed as unnecessary. Music not essential, Kenny said, shaking his head. That's like saying breathing isn't essential. What did you teach? Everything. Piano, guitar, singing. I started a children's choir that performed all over the county. Those kids… Her voice trailed off, and Kenny could see the pain of loss in her eyes. Those kids had real talent. Some of them had never touched an instrument before they came to my class. Kenny felt something stirring in his chest, a familiar feeling that had guided him through many of his most important decisions over the years. Do you still play? He asked. At home sometimes. I have an old piano in my apartment, but it's not the same without the children. The businessman from the corner table stood up abruptly, throwing money on the table. Come on guys, let's get out of here. This place has gone to hell. As they filed out, the heavy-set man deliberately bumped into Maria's chair. Next time, try not to destroy the customer's property, he muttered. Kenny rose halfway out of his seat, but Maria caught his arm. Please, she said quietly. It's not worth it. Kenny settled back down, but his eyes followed the men until they were out the door. How do you stand it? He asked. Being treated like that? Maria shrugged. You learn to focus on the good people, like you, like Mrs. Patterson over there. She comes in every Tuesday and always asks about my grandchildren. Like Jimmy, the trucker who sits at the counter, he saved up all year to give me a $50 tip last Christmas because he said I reminded him of his mother. She paused, looking around the diner with genuine affection. Most people are good, Mr. Rogers. You just have to look past the surface to see it. Kenny studied her face, seeing the wisdom that comes from a life of service and sacrifice. Maria, can I ask you something? Of course. If you could have anything in the world, anything at all, what would it be? Maria was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. I'd want my music program back. Not for me, but for the children. There are so many kids in this area who've never had the chance to learn music, to discover that they have voices worth hearing. She smiled sadly. But wishing won't make it happen. Maybe not, Kenny said thoughtfully. But sometimes wishing is the first step. The revelation. The morning rush began to slow, and the diner settled into the quieter rhythm of mid-morning. Kenny found himself in no hurry to leave. There was something about Maria's story that resonated with him. Something that reminded him why he had gotten into music in the first place. Tell me about your children's choir, he said. Maria's face brightened. Oh, they were wonderful. I had 37 kids at the end, ages 6 to 12. We practiced twice a week after school and performed at churches, community centers, even at the county fair. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through some photos. Look at this. She showed Kenny a picture of a group of children on a small stage, their faces glowing with pride and joy. They wore matching t-shirts that read, Henderson County Young Voices, and their expressions showed the confidence that comes from knowing you've done something beautiful. This was our last performance, Maria said softly. At the Christmas pageant 2 years ago. We sang traditional carols and some contemporary pieces. That little girl in the front row, Lily Martinez, she had never spoken above a whisper before she joined the choir. By the end, she was doing solos. Kenny studied the photo, seeing something that probably wasn't visible to most people. The way the children stood together, the care with which they had arranged themselves, the obvious love and respect they had for their teacher. Where are they now? He asked. Scattered. Some families moved away when the plant closed. Others, well, without the program, they drifted away from music. Lily's working at the grocery store after school now to help her family pay bills. Kenny set the phone down gently. Maria, I need to tell you something. Earlier, when those men were being rude to you, I wanted to intervene. But I held back because I thought it wasn't my place. Watching you handle that situation with such grace, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. What's that? That the most important performances aren't the ones on stage. They're the ones we give every day. When we choose to be kind instead of cruel, patient instead of angry, graceful instead of bitter. Maria looked down at her hands. I don't always feel graceful. Sometimes I go home and cry because of the way people treat me. But then I remember what I used to tell my students. Your voice matters, even when others can't hear it yet. Kenny felt a tightness in his throat. You still are a teacher, Maria. You just taught me something. What did I teach you? That dignity isn't about what you do for a living. It's about how you choose to live. The bell above the door chimed, and Henderson, the diner owner, came bustling in from his office. He was a thin man in his 60s with worry lines etched deep around his eyes. Maria, he called out, approaching their table. I heard there was some kind of incident with a customer's jacket. Kenny stood up and extended his hand. Mr. Henderson, I'm Kenny Rogers. I wanted to talk to you about that. Henderson's eyes widened. Kenny Rogers? The Kenny Rogers? That's right. And I want you to know that Maria here provided me with the finest service I've ever received in any restaurant. What happened with my jacket was a complete accident, caused by a careless customer. Maria handled the situation with professionalism and grace. Henderson looked confused. But your jacket is being dry cleaned as we speak, Kenny lied smoothly. No harm done. But I wanted to make sure you knew what a treasure you have in Maria. In my travels, I've met a lot of people in service industries, and she's truly exceptional. Henderson beamed with pride. We certainly think so. Maria's been with us 3 years now, and she's one of our best. I can see why, Kenny said. Then, looking directly at Maria, he added, and I have a feeling she's going to be doing even more important work soon. The proposal. After Henderson returned to his office, Kenny sat back down across from Maria. There was something different in his demeanor now, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. Maria, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Okay, she said, looking puzzled. How would you feel about starting a new children's choir? Not just here in Henderson County, but something bigger, something that could reach children all across this region who've never had access to music education. Maria stared at him. Mr. Rogers, I appreciate the thought, but I don't have the resources for something like that. I can barely afford to keep my piano tuned. Kenny smiled. What if resources weren't an issue? What if I told you I wanted to fund a music education program for underserved children, and I wanted you to run it? The color drained from Maria's face. You're joking. I never joke about music, Kenny said seriously. Maria, I've been looking for a way to give back. Something meaningful that goes beyond writing checks to charities. Your story, your dedication to those children, it's exactly what I've been searching for. But why me? You don't even know me. Kenny gestured around the diner. I've learned more about your character in the last hour than I could learn about most people in a year. You've shown me dignity under pressure, grace in the face of rudeness, and a passion for music education that survived even when your job was taken away. He leaned forward, his voice growing more animated. Here's what I'm thinking. We start with a mobile music program, a converted bus that travels to schools and community centers. We hire qualified teachers like yourself, provide instruments, and bring music to children who would never otherwise have access to it. Maria's hands were shaking. Mr. Rogers, this is too much. I couldn't possibly… Yes, you could, Kenny said firmly. And you will. Because those children need you, and you need them. This isn't charity, Maria. This is an investment in the future. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Hello, Janet. It's Kenny. I need you to set up a meeting with our foundation lawyers. I want to establish a new educational program. No, this can't wait until next week. I want to start the paperwork today. Maria sat in stunned silence as Kenny spoke rapidly into the phone, outlining his vision for the mobile music program. When he hung up, she was crying. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for someone you just met? Kenny reached across the table and gently took her hands. Because 30 years ago, a teacher believed in me when nobody else did. Mrs. Catherine Murphy, 5th grade, Crockett Elementary School in Houston. She heard me humming in class and convinced my mother to let me take piano lessons. He paused, his own eyes growing misty. I never got the chance to thank her properly. She died before I became successful enough to find her and let her know what her kindness meant. But today I get to pass that gift forward. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Kenny said simply. Say yes to the children who are waiting for their Mrs. Murphy. Say yes to the music that's been sleeping in their hearts. Maria took a shaky breath. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course, yes. The transformation word of what happened at Millie's Diner spread through the small town like wildfire. By evening, the story had been shared hundreds of times on social media, picked up by local news stations, and eventually made its way to national media outlets. But the real story was just beginning. Kenny spent the rest of the day working with his foundation to establish the Santos Mobile Music Program, named in Maria's honor. Within a week, they had purchased a converted bus, hired 3 additional music teachers, and ordered enough instruments to outfit a small orchestra. I still can't believe this is real, Maria said as she walked through the converted bus for the first time. The interior had been fitted with keyboards, guitars, drums, and a sound system that would allow for both individual instruction and group performances. Believe it, Kenny said, running his hand along one of the guitar racks. This is going to change lives, Maria, starting with yours. The program launched 6 weeks later with a visit to Henderson Elementary School, the same school where Maria had taught before the budget cuts. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, no relation to the diner owner, greeted them with tears in her eyes. I can't tell you what this means to our children, she said as she watched students boarding the music bus. We've missed having music in their lives. Maria stood at the front of the bus, looking out at 25 eager faces. Some of these children had been her students before, others were new to her. All of them looked at her with the same expression she remembered from her teaching days. Hope mixed with curiosity, excitement tempered by shyness. Welcome to the Santos Mobile Music Program, she said, her voice strong and confident. My name is Mrs. Santos, and I'm here to help you discover something wonderful. Your own voice. A small hand shot up in the back. Mrs. Santos, is it true that Kenny Rogers is paying for all this? Maria smiled. Mr. Rogers helped make this possible, yes. But you know what? The most important thing isn't who paid for it. The most important thing is what you're going to do with this opportunity. She moved to the keyboard and played a simple melody. Music is a language that everyone can speak, even if they don't know it yet. By the time we're finished here today, each of you will have said something beautiful in that language. Kenny watched from the back of the bus, his heart full. This was why he had gotten into music all those years ago. Not for the fame or the money, but for moments like this, when music became a bridge between hearts. The ripple effect. 6 months after the coffee incident that changed everything, the Santos Mobile Music Program had visited 37 schools and community centers across 3 counties. More than 800 children had participated in the program, and 12 permanent music programs had been re-established in schools that had previously cut funding. But perhaps most importantly, Maria Santos had found her way back to herself. "You look different," Kenny observed as they sat in what had become their regular booth at Millie's Diner. They met there once a month to discuss the program's progress and plan for the future. "I feel different," Maria said, her face glowing with the satisfaction that comes from meaningful work. "Yesterday I got a letter from Lily Martinez. Remember her? The girl who used to whisper? She's been accepted to the State University's music education program. She wants to become a teacher." Kenny smiled. "That's wonderful. But it doesn't surprise me. You've always been able to see potential where others see problems." "I learned that from you," Maria said. "That day when I spilled coffee on your jacket, you saw something in me that I had forgotten was there." "I saw a teacher who had temporarily lost her classroom, but had never stopped being a teacher," Kenny corrected. "The potential was always there, Maria. It just needed the right opportunity to flourish." Henderson approached their table, coffee pot in hand. Over the months, he had become one of the program's biggest supporters, often donating meals for the teachers and volunteers. "How's the program going?" he asked as he refilled their cups. "Better than we ever dreamed," Maria said. "Next month, we're expanding to include a summer camp program, and Kenny has agreed to make a guest appearance at our year-end concert." Henderson's eyes widened. "You're going to perform? Here in Henderson County?" Kenny nodded. "Wouldn't miss it. These children have worked hard all year. They deserve a real celebration." After Henderson moved on to other tables, Kenny leaned back in the booth and studied Maria's face. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I've been in years," she said without hesitation. "But you know what makes me happiest?" "What's that?" "Knowing that this program will outlive both of us. That 50 years from now, there will still be children discovering music because of what started here, in this diner, with a spilled cup of coffee." Kenny felt a familiar tightness in his throat. "You know, people always ask me what my greatest achievement was. They expect me to say it was a particular song, or an award, or a successful album. What do you tell them?" "I used to say it was The Gambler. That song changed my life and touched millions of people. But now..." He gestured around the diner, then looked directly at Maria. "Now I think my greatest achievement was stopping for coffee on a rainy Tuesday morning." The concert. The Henderson County Community Center had never seen anything like it. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and sitting in the aisles. Local news crews filmed from the back, and social media posts about the event had drawn visitors from as far away as Nashville and Memphis. But the real stars of the evening were the children. Backstage, Maria moved among the young performers, adjusting costumes and offering last-minute encouragement. The children ranged in age from 6 to 16, representing every school and community center the mobile program had visited. Mrs. Santos, a nervous 12-year-old named David, approached her. "What if I forget the words?" Maria knelt down to his level. "Then you make up new ones. Music isn't about perfection, David. It's about sharing what's in your heart." Kenny watched the interaction from across the backstage area, marveling at Maria's natural ability to calm nerves and build confidence. She had found her calling again, and in doing so had helped dozens of children find theirs. "Places, everyone," the stage manager called out. The children took their positions on the risers that had been set up on stage. Maria walked to the piano and the audience fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said into the microphone, 6 months ago, the Santos Mobile Music Program began with a simple belief that every child deserves the chance to discover their voice. Tonight, you're going to hear proof that belief was correct. The first song was This Land Is Your Land. chosen because it was simple enough for the youngest children, but meaningful enough to resonate with the adults in the audience. As the children's voices rose in harmony, Kenny felt the same chill he'd experienced the first time he heard The Gambler played on the radio. They performed 5 songs in total, ranging from traditional folk tunes to contemporary pieces that showcased individual soloists. But the moment that brought the house down came when 8-year-old Lily Martinez, the girl who had once whispered, stepped forward to sing a solo. Her voice was clear and sweet as she sang a song she had written herself, about dreams that grow when someone believes in you. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Finally, it was time for Kenny's appearance. He walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, but he raised his hand for quiet. "Before I sing," he said, "I want to tell you about a remarkable woman named Maria Santos. 6 months ago, she accidentally spilled coffee on my jacket. It was the best thing that ever happened to me." He told the story simply and honestly, explaining how a moment of apparent disaster had led to something beautiful. When he finished, the audience gave Maria a standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. "Now," Kenny said, settling onto a stool with his guitar, "I'm going to sing a song that most of you know. But tonight, I'm not singing it for you. I'm singing it for all the teachers like Maria who see potential where others see problems, and for all the children who are brave enough to let their voices be heard." He began the opening chords of The Gambler. But as he reached the chorus, something magical happened. The children joined in, their young voices blending with his weathered one to create something entirely new. When the song ended, the silence lasted for a heartbeat before the audience erupted in the kind of applause that changes everything for everyone who hears it. The legacy 1 year later, Kenny Rogers stood on the same stage where the first Santos Mobile Music Program concert had taken place. But this time, he wasn't there to perform. He was there to witness something even more important. The program had grown beyond anyone's wildest dreams. There were now 5 mobile units serving 8 counties, employing 12 full-time music teachers, and reaching more than 2,000 children. 3 of the program's first students had received full scholarships to prestigious music schools, and dozens more had joined their school bands and choirs. But tonight was special for a different reason. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer said, "please welcome the new Director of Music Education for Henderson County Schools, Mrs. Maria Santos." The audience rose to their feet as Maria walked across the stage to accept the position that would allow her to rebuild the music program that had been cut 5 years earlier. She had come full circle, but she was no longer the same person who had lost her job to budget cuts. She was stronger now, more confident, armed with the knowledge that one person's kindness could change everything. "I want to thank Kenny Rogers for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself," Maria said into the microphone. "But more than that, I want to thank him for teaching me that how we treat each other in the small moments is what really matters." She paused, looking out at the audience that included many of her former students, now grown and starting families of their own. "A year ago, I thought my teaching career was over. I thought the best I could hope for was to serve coffee and clear tables until I was too old to work. But sometimes life has different plans for us. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning." In the audience, Kenny wiped his eyes and thought about the strange chain of events that had brought them all to this moment. If he had chosen to drive straight through to Arkansas that morning, if he had stopped at a different diner, if Maria had been working a different shift, any one of those small changes would have meant this moment never happened. But it had happened, and now hundreds of children would grow up with music in their lives because of it. After the ceremony, Kenny and Maria stood outside the community center, watching families load into cars and head home. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't spilled that coffee?" Maria asked. Kenny considered the question seriously. "I think we would have found each other eventually," he said finally. "Maybe not that day, maybe not in that way, but somehow. Some things are just meant to be." "You really believe that?" "I have to," Kenny said. "Because if I don't believe that kindness finds its way to where it's needed most, then all the music in the world doesn't mean much." Full circle. 5 years after the coffee incident that changed 2 lives, Millie's Diner had become something of a pilgrimage site for music teachers and students from across the region. The booth where Kenny and Maria had first talked was marked with a small brass plaque that read, "Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest changes." But on this particular morning, the diner looked much the same as it had on that rainy Tuesday when everything began. The same worn linoleum floors, the same red vinyl booths, the same warm smell of coffee and bacon that made it a refuge for travelers and locals alike. Kenny sat in his usual spot, now 81 and moving a little slower, but still making the monthly pilgrimage to meet with Maria and discuss the program's progress. The Santos Mobile Music Program had become a model for similar initiatives across the country, and Maria had been invited to speak at education conferences from California to Maine. "The bus broke down again yesterday," Maria said as she slid into the booth across from him. At 63, she had the energy of someone half her age, her face bright with the satisfaction that comes from work that matters. "Third time this year," Kenny observed. "Maybe it's time for a new one." "Actually, it's time for 3 new ones. We've got requests from counties as far away as Alabama and Kentucky. They want to start their own programs." Kenny smiled. "That's wonderful. How many children will that reach?" "If we can fund all the requests we've received, we'll be serving more than 10,000 children by next year." Maria shook her head in wonder. "Do you remember when we thought 25 kids on a bus was ambitious?" Henderson approached with the coffee pot, a ritual that had remained unchanged over the years. "The usual?" he asked, though he was already filling their cups. "Henderson," Kenny said, "I've been thinking about that plaque on our booth." "What about it? I think it's wrong." Henderson looked alarmed. "Wrong? But you approved the wording yourself." Kenny smiled. "It says sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest changes. But I don't think spilling coffee was a small gesture. I think it was exactly the gesture that was needed, at exactly the right time, by exactly the right person." Maria reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You know what I learned from all this?" "What's that?" "That every day we have chances to be somebody's Kenny Rogers. Every interaction, every moment of kindness or impatience, every choice to help or to walk away. They all matter more than we know." Kenny nodded, thinking of all the letters they had received over the years from children whose lives had been changed by the program, from teachers who had been inspired to start their own initiatives, from parents who had watched their children discover confidence through music. "You know what the best part is?" Kenny said. "Tell me." 20 years from now, when we're both gone, there will still be children learning music because of what started here. There will be teachers who never heard of either of us, working with kids who don't know our names, but they'll all be part of this story." Maria smiled. "The story of the spilled coffee that changed the world. The story of what happens when people choose kindness over convenience," Kenny corrected. "The coffee was just the catalyst." As if summoned by their conversation, a young woman approached their table hesitantly. She was probably in her mid-20s, with the confident bearing of someone who had found their purpose in life. "Excuse me," she said nervously. "Are you Kenny Rogers and Maria Santos?" "We are," Maria said kindly. "How can we help you?" "I'm Sarah Chen. I teach music at 3 elementary schools in eastern Kentucky. I just wanted to thank you. I started my program because I read about yours online. We've been running for 2 years now, and we've reached over 400 children." Kenny and Maria exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing. Here was proof that their story was already spreading beyond their control, beyond their ability to track or measure. "That's wonderful, Sarah," Maria said. "Are you having success?" "More than I ever dreamed. Last week, one of my students, a little boy who was too shy to speak in class, performed a solo at our spring concert. His parents cried, I cried, even his principal cried." Kenny felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever he heard about the program's ripple effects. "What made you decide to start teaching music?" "I read an interview where Mrs. Santos said that every child deserves the chance to discover their voice. That statement changed my life. I was working in a bank, making good money but feeling empty. Now I wake up every day excited to go to work." After Sarah left, Kenny and Maria sat in comfortable silence, watching the familiar rhythm of the diner's morning rush. New faces mixed with familiar ones, travelers and locals sharing the same space, the same coffee, the same moment in time. "Do you ever regret it?" Maria asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Stopping that morning. Your life would have been simpler if you had just driven past." Kenny considered the question, thinking about all the complications that had come with funding and managing the program, all the meetings and phone calls and administrative details that had filled his later years. "Maria," he said finally, "I spent 50 years of my career singing about gamblers and cowards and islands in the stream. But the only real gamble I ever took was betting that kindness matters more than convenience. And it's the only bet I ever made that I knew I couldn't lose." He looked around the diner, at the families sharing breakfast, at the truckers grabbing coffee before hitting the road, at the waitress who reminded him of Maria all those years ago. Patient, dignified, working hard to make other people's days a little brighter. Besides, he added with a smile, my life wasn't simpler before. It was just smaller. The eternal ripple. "10 years had passed since that rainy morning when coffee changed everything, and Kenny Rogers was gone now, having passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 85. But the Santos Mobile music program continued to thrive under Maria's leadership, and the ripple effects of that single moment of kindness continued to spread in ways neither of them could have imagined. At the annual Kenny Rogers Memorial Concert, held every year at the Henderson County Community Center, Maria stood before an audience of more than 3,000 people, teachers, students, parents, and music lovers who had come to celebrate not just Kenny's musical legacy, but his legacy of compassion. 10 years ago, Maria began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. A famous man could have chosen anger when a clumsy waitress spilled coffee on his expensive jacket. Instead, he chose kindness. That choice didn't just change my life. It changed thousands of lives. She gestured to the stage behind her, where more than 200 young musicians sat with their instruments ready to perform. These were students from the original Santos program and the dozens of similar programs that had sprung up across the country and beyond. Kenny used to say that the best songs are the ones that make you remember who you want to be. Well, the song he sang with his life was about choosing love over indifference, hope over cynicism, action over apathy, and every time one of us chooses kindness over convenience, we're singing that song too. In the front row, Sarah Chen, now the director of music education for the entire Eastern Kentucky School District, wiped tears from her eyes. Beside her sat David Martinez, Lily's older brother, who had just been accepted to Juilliard. Next to him was Henderson, now in his 80s but still serving coffee and still donating meals to the program's volunteers. But perhaps the most meaningful presence in the audience was that of 12-year-old Marcus Thompson, a shy boy from rural Tennessee who had joined the program just 6 months earlier. His teacher had told Maria that Marcus reminded her of Lily. The same whispered voice, the same hidden potential, the same need for someone to believe in him. After the concert, as the crowd dispersed and the equipment was packed away, Maria found herself alone on the stage where it all began. She sat down at the piano and played a simple melody, the same one she had played on that first day aboard the mobile music bus. "Thank you, Kenny," she said quietly to the empty auditorium. "Thank you for showing me that sometimes the end of one story is really the beginning of another." Outside, the autumn rain had begun to fall, just as it had on that morning 10 years ago, when a country music legend stopped for coffee and ended up finding something more valuable than fame or fortune: the chance to change lives through simple human kindness. And in schools and community centers across the country, in mobile music buses and refurbished auditoriums, in the voices of children who had learned that they mattered enough for someone to invest in their dreams, the song continued. The spilled coffee had long since been cleaned up, the stained jacket had been forgotten, but the melody of compassion that began in a small diner on a rainy Tuesday morning played on, as beautiful and enduring as any song ever written. Because some music doesn't come from instruments or voices. Some music comes from hearts that choose to care, hands that reach out to help, and souls that recognize the sacred in the ordinary. And that music, once it begins, never really ends. It just finds new voices to carry it forward, one small act of kindness at a time.